I'm going to try to give you an understanding of this whole management period. Why should I even care about, Professor Green, I hated history in high school. So why do you expect me to pay attention when you're talking about history in terms of management? Because if you don't understand what happened in the past, you're going to wind up reliving that in the future. And so there is, you'll see some deja vus. I'm going to share that with you. So management thought, we're looking at the social. Social deals with people. How do we interact? How do we interact as in individuals, one person to another person? How do they interact in terms of groups? How do you deal in terms of economics, the money, the resources? How does that play a part into that? And the political relates to power. How is power shared or not shared, distributed, or all the concepts that circle this concept called management thought. In my flip charts that I love dearly, and you will learn to love them too, I talk about management thought, and I will bring you through this situation in terms of understanding what has happened through the years. Back before the Industrial Revolution, there were the agrarians. The agrarians were farmers. There was a great sense of family, community, God. Independence was important. They worked in rural areas for their food. Families worked together, grew up together. There was a sense, a spiritualness. There was a relationship between man and the earth, man and the soil. It was very simple. Whoever owned the most land and treated it right, very environmentally conscious, because they wanted to be concerned about those elements that protected their livelihoods. So the agrarians lived in very close-knit arrangements. So technology bloomed, grew, and farming became more productive. You needed less people. They were dispersed. And there was a large group of young people. Got tired of living in isolated areas. So they did like most of your kids do today. They left that small town and they went to the city. Went to the city to find work. And in the cities, there was these, and we talk about the industrial age, industrial revolution. And it happened in Europe, but I'm only focusing about America for us in terms of this. There was these manufacturing plants. And they saw, they got all these agrarians. And they considered the agrarians ignorant. They didn't understand the manufacturing, they didn't understand. So they had to create a term called management. They needed to control these agrarians because they were ignorant. They didn't understand about what's going on in the shops. And so they hired them. And what happened? You had the breaking of the agrarian spirit. Because they were independent. So now they depended on, they went from being independent to dependent. There was a closeness of family. Families got split. You had children working long days and hours in the factories. You had wives working in the factories. And so there was a separation of those things that happened. And so there were rules put in place to control the agrarians. Today, that same system we're in. I want you to think about that as we go into that. So that came about. There was a gentleman that saw how unproductive all these big plants and these manufacturers were very unproductive. They were not using their time right. This guy was named Frederick Taylor. And we consider him the father of the scientific management. We're talking about the classical school. And the classical school, it was a focus on the task. How do we improve the task? How do we make the task better? Frederick Taylor was a young man that came from a very prominent family. And he decided to become a laborer. Instead of going into an institution that would be highly regarded by his family, he became a laborer when he was growing up. And he learned a lot about the working attitude. And so when he became older and he got in control, he made suggestions to management in terms of let's organize the operation so it's more efficient by how long does it take a worker to do a task? Let's measure those and let's make them accountable. How many hours we need to make that process in place? So they did that. That's what they came with the scientific management function, where they focused on how to improve the process. Now, they took Taylor really didn't hate workers. He did not. He really thought a lot about them. But individuals took his rigor, his strictness in terms of, workers having specific tasks. They have time to take the task, scoping out what work is going to do and how long did it take. He was really for treating the workers well. But what happened is managers misused that. They controlled the workers, and there was a distrust of management. There was a distrust that came across. Then you had the administrative school. Well, before that you had a husband and wife couple, the Galbraiths, Lydian and Frank Galbraith. They took it another step. They started actually doing time studies also, looking at fatigue in order to come up with better ways. So there were other examples of doing that. And I'm not going to go into the administrative, but bureaucracy. There was a guy named Maxwell Weber, and he was focusing on. You heard the term bureaucracy. Well, it was not a bad term. It was not a bad term at one time. It was basically you need to have order, and you need to have certain people do certain things, and it needs to be well defined. Well, that was part of his suggestion. There are other people that you need to look through. Now, what was the big emphasis in the classical school? What was the big emphasis? It was on the task. Well, we talked about Frederick Taylor being the father of the scientific management. There was a lady, Mary Parker Follett. She might be considered a diva, the queen of the behavior school. The behavior school was a focus on the workers. Miss Follett, she was ahead of her time. I think she was a sociologist, a psychologist. She was a lady of her time. She believed that if you treat workers a certain way and you gave them a certain responsibility and you empowered them to do the right things, they would do it. She believed that, ahead of her time. In that vein, there was what we call the Hawthorne effect. Anybody ever heard of that? The Hawthorne study has to do with Elton Mayo. Well, basically, they went to Westinghouse. And they done some studies looking at females. And it was a factory. And they tried different environmental functions to see what would happen, change. And they realized they turned lights on, they turned the heat off, that the ladies, their production would increase no matter what they would do. And they realized something. That if you pay attention to the workers, that you can impact performance. A very profound result that we still today look at was the Hawthorne study. There's also a belief, some people come with a theory, and there's Douglas McGregor, that based theory X and theory Y. Theory X. kind of follows some of the stereotypes that workers are basically lazy. They're lazy. They don't want to work, and you have to do stuff to them. Remember the agrarians? So they believe that. Theory Y believe that, you know what? If you give workers a chance, you give them an opportunity to be successful, they can be successful. Do you see how those two theories, if a manager implements one or the other, do we understand what kind of different results they may get? And so there's one of the reasons why we look at those type of schools. You have the quantitative school. The quantitative school, we talk about operations management being part of that. It's a look at how do we make the process of the task, how do we make it more effective in terms of looking at analysis. We're trying to look at quantitative analysis to make the process more functional. Total quality management. Charles Deming, Crosby, all those individuals will focus on let's a further I guess you would say a migration or elevation of the classical school, but let's take some measurements. Let's make that process good. Then we have the system school, again trying to break down operations into systems to make them effective. Then we have the contingency school. Look, contingency school. Contingency school says, you know what? There's not one way to find. There's not one solution for all the problems. They realize that different situations, different variables will change. Now, how that relates? It relates to because most organizations are not what we call a closed system. In engineering, closed system is very simple. Means that nothing can impact us. No, people acting. There's a tornado going out. There's a fire going on. There's a lot of change going on around the organization, and we're not impacted one way. Nothing impacts us. For the most part, it's open that we're impacted. So culture changes that happens when you see 18, 20-year-old, 60-year-old wearing tattoos all across their face. They come to work. That impact. That's a part of that. Or work ethic, or all those type of things that we're impacted. We become a product that we don't live in closed systems. And so that's a challenge that most organizations face today. Any questions? So now, what do you think most organizations operate in terms of schools? Most organizations, how do you think they function? I'm gonna do something that very seldom do. I'm stereotyping. What do you think most organizations in terms of schools about? What do you think most of them are at?
Is this one per day?
One per person, huh? Questions? Most of them operate under that scientific management classical school. I got to control that. The theory is that managers are smarter than workers. The basic underlying principle: the managers are smarter than workers.